The moon was quiet, cold, and full of silence. It was a forgotten place, far away from stars, cities, and life. Nothing lived here, nothing breathed here. But now, something had arrived. Something broken, and something alive, a small alien ship. Crashed through the dark clouds above. Its engines were dead, its wings torn, and its body full of smoke. It hit the icy ground with a loud boom, sliding across sharp rocks before stopping near a frozen cliff. The sky went quiet again, as if holding its breath. Inside the broken ship, two small alien girls slowly opened. Their eyes, they were scared, cold, and weak. Their skin was blue, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. One was older, maybe 15, and the other was younger, maybe 10. They had no names now, no family, no planet. They had only each other. And even that felt like it could be lost. The older girl pulled herself up, her hands shaking. She looked. Around the ship, fire, sparks, and cold metal surrounded her. She saw the younger girl trapped under a broken seat. Without thinking, she ran over, pushed the seat off, and held her sister close. "We are alive," she whispered. But the younger girl did not answer. She was breathing, but just barely. Her body was too cold, and her skin had cuts and burns. Older girl knew they had to leave the ship. It would not keep them warm, and the fire might explode soon. She tore off a piece of the seat cover and wrapped it around her sister. Then she kicked open the side door with all her strength. A wave of cold air hit her face, like knives of ice. She stepped out, carrying the younger girl in her arms. Her bare feet touched the snow, and she gasped. But she kept walking, step by step, teeth shaking, heart beating fast. The land was strange, full of ice, black mountains and dead trees. She saw no lights, no buildings, no signs of life, just the sky above, full of dark clouds and two red moons. She had no idea where they were. She fell once, then twice, but each time she stood back up, her sister was getting colder, and the wind was getting stronger. She had to find shelter, any shelter, a cave, a hole, even a rock big enough to hide behind. After walking for what felt like hours, she found a small cave near a frozen lake. She crawled inside, placed her sister down gently, and curled up next to her. She held her tight and whispered stories they used to tell each other back on their old planet. But the stories did not help, not this time. She looked outside the cave and saw only darkness. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. Aliens were not supposed to cry. At least that's what their captors had told them. But tonight, she let the tears fall, even if they froze on her face. Suddenly, she saw a light in the sky. Not a star, not a moon. It was moving slowly, coming closer. It was a ship, not like theirs, bigger and brighter. Her heart stopped for a moment. Was it the enemy again? Had they found them? Or was it something else? Something human? She ran outside the cave and waved her arms. She screamed a sound that did not belong to any language. Just a cry for help, just a voice in the void. The ship turned slowly in her direction. A small beam of light pointed at her. It grew brighter, warmer. She held her sister's body tightly and waited. The ship landed, quiet and calm. The door opened, and a figure stepped out. It was tall, covered in armor, and had a light on its helmet. A human. The alien girl stepped back, afraid. But the human removed his helmet. He was not angry, not shouting. He looked at her with soft eyes and open hands. He saw the fear, the hunger, the cold. He looked at the younger girl and knelt beside her. Then he took off his thick jacket and placed it around both of them. "You're safe now," he said, slowly, gently. The alien girl did not understand the words, but she felt the meaning, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt warmth again. The human picked up the younger girl and signaled the older one to follow. He led them into his ship, where lights were soft and air was warm. The door closed behind them, and the cold was left outside. The alien girl looked around the ship. It smelled strange but clean. She sat near her sister. who now moved slightly under the blanket. The human gave her a drink and pointed to the bed. She did not know what to say. Jacob Maddox wasn't supposed to be on this moon. His mission had ended 5 days ago. The science team had returned to Earth. But Jacob stayed behind, alone, against orders. People thought he was just an explorer. But Jacob was more than that. He was searching for something he couldn't name. Not gold, not power. Just something real. He sat in his old ship, drinking recycled coffee. The silence of the moon was peaceful and heavy, until his scanner beeped. Life signs weak, faint, alien. He stared at the screen in disbelief. This moon was dead. Nothing should be alive out there. He stood up fast. Armor half on. He grabbed his medkit, cloak, and a small plasma pistol. Just in case, he stepped outside. Cold wind slicing across his face like broken glass. His boots crunched on the ice as he followed the signal. The landscape was white and gray, full of fog and frozen bones. He walked for 20 minutes before he saw them. 2 figures, huddled together in a cave, one small, one smaller. Blue skin, glowing eyes barely moving. Aliens. Jacob froze, his mind racing. He had seen creatures like them before, in enemy files. Escaped slaves, genetically modified, marked as dangerous. But these two didn't look dangerous. They looked broken, like frightened children who had run too far from home. He lowered his pistol slowly. One of them, the older girl, stood up and shielded the younger one with her thin arms. No weapon, no threat, just fear. Jacob took off his cloak and tossed it toward her feet. "You're freezing," he said. She didn't answer, just stared. Her lips were purple, her legs shaking, but she bent down, wrapped her sister in the cloak, and picked her up. Jacob stepped back and pointed at his ship in the distance. "Warmth, food, safety," he said, pointing. Still no words from her, but her eyes followed his finger. Then slowly she nodded. He walked ahead, checking behind every few steps. She followed, carefully, carrying her sister. No trust, not yet, but no fear either. Just hope, small and quiet like a match in the dark. Back at the ship, Jacob opened the door and turned up the heat. The girls stepped inside, wide-eyed. They had never seen a human ship from the inside. Lights, sounds, warmth. It was like a dream. Jacob made them sit on a soft bed and covered them in blankets. He handed the older girl a nutrition bar. She smelled it first, then gave a piece to her sister before eating it herself. Jacob smiled, impressed by her strength. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She just blinked, confused. He pointed to himself. "Jacob," then pointed to her. She looked down, then up again, and whispered, "No name." That hit Jacob harder than he expected. A life without a name, without identity, was no life at all. Hours passed, and the younger girl finally opened her eyes. She looked at Jacob and didn't cry, didn't scream. She simply stared, then reached for the warm cup in his hand. Jacob gave it to her, and she sipped slowly. Then, for the first time, the ship felt full, not of voices or laughter, but of something more powerful. Connection. Later that night, Jacob sat by the window, looking out at the moons. He had a message from command. They were asking why he hadn't returned. He ignored it. The girls were asleep, wrapped in blankets like small cocoons. Their breathing was soft and steady. Jacob checked the scanners again. But this time, there was something else. Another ship, far away, just entering the atmosphere, unregistered. Dark-colored, moving slow and careful. He narrowed his eyes, fingers tightening around his console. Someone was looking for them, and they were getting close. Jacob knew that ship wasn't from Earth. He had seen ships like that in old battles. Pirates, slavers, bounty hunters. He stood up and checked his plasma rifle. The warmth of the ship disappeared from his mind. This wasn't just about shelter anymore. This was about protection. He walked over to the two girls, still sleeping peacefully. He stared at them for a long time, in this cold, endless galaxy. They had no one, no family, no planet, no names. But now they had him. and he would fight the entire galaxy before he let anyone take them away again. Inside Jacob's ship, everything was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after pain, after fear, the kind of quiet that feels like safety. The older alien girl sat by the corner. She held her younger sister's hand, who was now sleeping softly. Warmth from the bed heaters wrapped around them like invisible arms. For the first time in days, they weren't shaking. Jacob watched from the other side of the room. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a wild animal. Not because he saw them as danger, but because he didn't want to break the moment. He brought a small metal box and placed it between them. Then, with a few clicks and sparks, a soft fire came to life. Not a real flame, a heat cube from EarthTech, but it flickered like one. The fire glowed red and orange, dancing on their faces. The girls looked at it with wide eyes, as if it was magic. Jacob opened a ration kit and poured warm broth into a small metal bowl. He placed it near the fire, letting the smell fill the room. The older girl sniffed it carefully, then helped her sister sit up. She dipped a spoon and gently brought it to the young one's lips. The little girl drank, and her eyes closed in peace. Then the older one tasted it herself. She smiled. Just a little, the first smile Jacob had seen from her. He sat near them, not too close, and spoke softly. "I used to eat this when I was lost," he said. "Same moon, same cold, different pain." The girl tilted her head, not understanding his words. But she listened. Sometimes, words don't need to be understood to feel real, Jacob pointed at her. "You," he said, then at himself. "Me," then at both of them. "Safe." She stared at him, quiet for a moment. Then she copied him, pointed at herself. "You," she said, unsure. Jacob smiled and shook his head gently. "No," he corrected kindly. "You are you." Then he said it again. "Safe." The girl touched her chest, then placed her hand on her sister's forehead. She looked at Jacob and whispered one word, "Home." Jacob froze. The word came out broken, almost cracked but clear. His heart dropped in his chest. That one word meant everything. It wasn't just a sound. It was trust. It was hope. It was a seed planted in burned soil. The little sister opened her eyes and looked at Jacob too. Then she reached out her tiny hand toward him. He took it gently. Like holding a flower, she traced the badge on his jacket with her fingers. A small Earth flag. She tapped it, then looked up at him. Jacob understood. She was asking, "Where are you from?" He pointed to the stars outside the window. "Far away," he said. "But now I'm here." The older girl looked outside too. Black sky, silver rocks, twin red moons, still cold. Still dangerous, but no longer empty. Then suddenly, the ship beeped. A soft alarm. Jacob stood up fast and checked the console. A satellite had picked up movement on the surface. Another ship had landed nearby. Small, silent, unmarked. Jacob narrowed his eyes. It wasn't a rescue team. It wasn't friendly. He shut off the lights and lowered the heat to stay hidden. The room turned darker, shadows dancing around the fake fire. He turned to the girls. His voice low but calm. "We have to hide." The girls didn't understand the words, but they saw his face. They saw the tension in his eyes. They knew. Jacob pressed a hidden panel and opened a secret floor hatch. He signaled them to go inside. It was small, but safe. An old escape compartment with life support. The younger girl went in first. Then the older. Jacob gave them blankets, food, and water. Before closing the hatch, he looked at the older girl one last time. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "Don't come out until I say." She grabbed his hand and squeezed it. Then she said the second human word she had learned. "Please." Jacob hesitated, then nodded. He gently closed the hatch and turned toward the door. He picked up his rifle and loaded it. Whoever was coming. They weren't going to take those girls. Not now, not ever. He stood alone in the middle of the ship. One man, two daughters hidden below, a past full of regrets, and a future he was willing to fight for. Outside, the enemy ship's ramp opened. Footsteps touched the frozen ground. Voices in a language Jacob knew too well. They were hunters, slavers, and they were close. But Jacob was ready, because this time, he wasn't fighting for a mission. He was fighting for a home. The sound of footsteps echoed on the icy ground outside the ship. 3 shadows moved slowly, carefully, like wolves searching for prey. Their armor was dark and dented, painted with old blood. Their helmets glowed red, and their boots left deep marks in the snow. They weren't here to help, they were here to take. And Jacob knew that too well. Inside the ship, Jacob stood like a statue, his rifle steady, his heart calm but sharp. He had seen these types before. Mercenaries, slavers, cowards with guns. They worked for money, not honor. And this moon was perfect for disappearing evidence. He whispered into the hidden speaker under his desk. "They're here," he said. No one replied. But he knew the girls could hear him. They were in the escape hatch below. Holding their breath, Jacob took one deep breath, then opened the main ramp. Cold air rushed in, slicing through the warmth like a knife. The 3 mercs stepped inside. Weapons drawn, eyes scanning. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward and removed his helmet. Jacob froze for just a second. He knew that face, Karzan, an old name from an old life. They had once fought together on a distant world. Jacob had left that life behind, but Karzan hadn't. Well, Karzan said with a grin. Jacob Maddox. Hiding on a dead moon. He looked around the ship, then leaned in. "We're tracking 2 subjects, escapees. Class B, dangerous, female." He smiled again. "Seeing anything unusual?" Jacob didn't blink. "Just rocks and ghosts," he replied. "No girls here," Karzan chuckled. "You were always a terrible liar," he said, "but still better than most humans." The merc behind him, a bulky one with a scar on his shin, started scanning the room with a handheld sensor. Jacob tensed. The sensor beeped once, faintly. Karzan raised an eyebrow. "Funny," he said. "That's the kind of beep we get near heat signatures." He stepped closer to Jacob. "Are you protecting them?" Jacob didn't move. "Maybe I am," he said slowly. "Maybe I'm not." The air turned heavy. The 3rd merc raised his gun, but Jacob was faster. He hit a switch behind his back, and the floor lit up with red lights. Boom! A flash mine exploded near the mercs, throwing them off balance. Jacob dove behind the table and opened fire. The first few shots missed, but then he hit the one with the scar. He dropped fast, groaning in pain. Karzan ducked and rolled, firing back. Jacob moved fast, switching cover, aiming sharp. They had trained together once. Now they were trying to kill each other. Meanwhile, underground, the girls held each other tightly. They could hear the blasts, the shouting. The younger one covered her ears and shook. The older one whispered to her. "No fear," she said in her own language. "Jacob is strong." Back above, the fight grew louder. Messier. Jacob took a hit on his shoulder, but he didn't stop. He knew every corner of this ship, every trap. He activated the emergency lockdown. Doors sealed. Lights flickered red. Karzan shouted from behind a crate. "You're risking your life for 2 aliens?" Jacob shouted back, "No, I'm risking it for 2 children." The last merc tried to break the floor hatch with a laser. Jacob saw it and launched a shock dart. The laser exploded in the merc's hand, knocking him out cold. Now only Karzan was left, wounded, angry, confused. He stood bleeding from his leg and looked at Jacob. "You used to be one of us," he growled. "What happened to you?" Jacob stepped forward, lowering his weapon slowly. "I opened my eyes," he said. "I saw who the real monsters were." Karzan raised his gun again, and Jacob fired first. A clean shot to the chest. Karzan dropped, the light in his eyes fading. No words left, no more lies. The ship went silent again. Jacob lowered his weapon and exhaled deeply. He limped to the floor hatch and opened it. The girls looked up, eyes wide with fear. "It's over." Jacob whispered, "You're safe again." The older girl crawled out and helped him sit. She saw the blood on his shoulder and tore a piece of her blanket to wrap it. Jacob smiled weakly. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him and said, "One word. Fight." Jacob laughed softly. "Yes," he said. "Sometimes we have to fight." The ship was quiet again, but not at peace. Smoke filled the corners. Sparks flickered from broken panels. Jacob sat on the floor, holding his injured shoulder. Blood dripped slowly through the cloth tied by the alien girl. He had stopped 3 mercenaries, but something didn't feel right. There was no way they came alone. Someone else was still out there, watching, waiting. Below deck, the younger girl slept, her body warm and calm for the first time. The older girl, however, couldn't rest. She stood by the window, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. Her hands trembled. Not from cold, but from something deeper: fear, memory, rage. She remembered the prison planet, the whips, the hunger, the darkness. She remembered running barefoot across metal floors. She remembered her sister screaming when the guards separated. Them, those men today, they were the same kind, same voices, same eyes, same lies. And even though Jacob fought them, she knew they would return. She turned toward Jacob, who was trying to stand. "You need rest," she said softly, surprising him. He blinked. You speak?" She nodded slowly, some words, learning. Jacob smiled, even through the pain. "You're stronger than I thought." Suddenly, the ship's radar beeped. Jacob dragged himself to the console and checked. Another signal. Larger ship, closing in fast. He cursed it under his breath. "No time," he said. He tried to stand but fell again. The girl rushed to his side and helped him sit. He looked into her eyes, serious and sharp. "You must take your sister and run," he said. "Use the tunnel under the lake. Go north. Find the human outpost." But the girl didn't move. She stared at him, her jaw tight, her hands clenched. "No," she said. "Always run, always hide." She stood up and walked toward the weapons locker. She opened it and pulled out a plasma torch. She held it with both hands, shaking, but firm. Jacob's eyes widened. "That's not a toy," he warned. She looked at him, her voice steady. "Not toy," she said. "Tool." She had never held a weapon before. But this wasn't about fighting. It was about ending the fear. She stepped outside the ship and into the wind. The cold bit at her feet, her face, her skin. But she didn't stop. The plasma torch in her hands hummed to life, glowing blue. She walked through the snow toward the cliffs, where the enemy ship was landing. Lights cut through the dark sky. A door opened and figures stepped out, tall, armored, cold. A voice shouted something in a language she knew too well. "Return the assets and we won't burn the ship." She stood still, facing them, her body small, her arms bare, her eyes on fire. "I am not asset," she said loudly. "I am not slave," the merc leader laughed. Brave words for a child. She didn't answer. She just lit the plasma torch and stepped forward. The ground under her feet steamed from the heat. One of the mercs raised his rifle. She stopped. Walking, she raised the torch high and shouted a word. Not alien, not human, but pure rage. Enough. Suddenly behind her, a blast echoed from the ship. Jacob had crawled to a hidden turret, firing warning shots. The mercs scattered for cover. The girl used the moment to charge forward. She wasn't trained, but she was fast. She jumped behind one of the rocks and slammed the plasma torch into the merc's weapon. Metal melted in seconds. Sparks flew everywhere. She kicked him down and took cover again, breathing hard. Jacob watched from the distance, half shocked, half proud. He whispered to himself, "She's not just brave. She's becoming free." The mercs regrouped and fired again. But now, the older girl wasn't alone. Jacob joined from the other side. And together they forced the mercs back toward the cliff. One slipped, falling into the darkness below. The other ran, signaling retreat. The leader stood frozen, weapon aimed. But he looked into the girl's eyes and saw something he didn't expect. Fire, not from the torch, but from her soul. He dropped his gun and ran toward the ship. Moments later, their engines roared and vanished into the sky. Silence returned, snow fell gently again, and the girl stood tall in the middle of it. She looked down at the plasma torch, still warm, still glowing. She dropped it slowly, letting it sink into the snow. She didn't need it anymore. Jacob limped over and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him. He didn't need to say anything. She had burned the chains that once held her, not with fire, but with courage. Snow fell in silence. The moon sky had turned red above the frozen cliffs. Blood and fire had stained the white ground, but the fight was not yet over. Inside the ship, Jacob leaned against a wall. His body was tired, his shoulder burned. He had pushed himself past the limit, but he couldn't rest, not yet. The older alien girl stood beside him, her face calm. She held a cloth in her hands and wrapped it around his wound. She was no longer the scared creature from before. She moved like someone who had chosen to live, not just survive. Jacob watched her silently. Something about her reminded him of a little girl from long ago, not alien, but human, his own daughter. She had died in a war Earth never talks about anymore. He had tried to protect her, but he had failed. Since that day, he never stayed close to anyone again, until now. A soft voice came from behind. The younger alien girl had woken up. She walked toward them, dragging a blanket. She sat beside Jacob and held his hand. He looked at the two girls, and something inside him shifted. They weren't just passengers anymore. They were family. Even if they came from a different star. Then the warning lights flashed red again. A message blinked on the screen. Enemy ship approaching, large class, ETA, 4 minutes. Jacob cursed under his breath. This was no scouting team. This was the real strike force. The final attempt to take the girls. He stood up, limping toward the command panel. He opened the escape pod menu, one pod fully fueled, hidden in the lower deck. He called the girls over, his voice gentle but firm. "You must go now," he said. "They're coming, and I won't be able to stop them this time." The older girl shook her head. "No," Jacob tried again. "This pod will take you to the human outpost. You'll be safe there. They'll help you." He handed her a small chip, glowing blue. "Give them this. Proof that you're not enemies." But the girl pushed it back into his hand. "Not without you," she said. Jacob smiled, tired and full of sorrow. "I can't go," he said. "If I leave, they'll follow. If I stay, I can slow them down." The younger girl looked up with teary eyes. "No," she whispered. "Together." Jacob turned away, fighting the weight in his chest. He had been trained to make hard choices, to leave people behind for the greater good. But for once, he didn't want to be the soldier. He wanted to be human. He looked at the screen again. 2 minutes left. He stared at the escape pod control, then back at the girls. They were both holding hands, waiting for his word, not orders, not fear, just trust. Jacob took a deep breath, then made his choice. He slammed the pod control and locked it from the inside. "No one's running," he said. "If we die fighting. But if we live together." The older girl stepped forward and said softly, "Family." Jacob nodded. "Yes," he replied. "Family." He moved to the weapon rack and handed her a small energy shield. He gave the younger one a noise beacon, a distraction tool. Then he grabbed his rifle and stood tall again. Outside, engines roared like thunder. A large black ship landed on the ridge. Its door opened, and a squad of armored soldiers marched out. But inside the small ship, it wasn't fear that filled the air. It was fire. Not the kind that burns wood, but the kind that burns weakness. Jacob looked at the girls one last time, his voice calm but unshakable. "This is our home now. And no one takes our home." As the door opened and light poured in, Jacob stood at the front, rifle ready, the older girl behind him, shield in hand. The younger girl beside her, eyes glowing. 3 souls from different stars, one purpose. The battle for survival was over. Now it was time for something else, something stronger, the battle for belonging. The sky burned above the frozen cliffs, engines roared. Snow lifted in violent waves. The enemy ship had landed, massive and black. Its shadow swallowed the light. Jacob stood at the entrance of his ship. Rifle steady, his breath was sharp, his legs weak, but his eyes never blinked. Beside him, the older alien girl held her shield close to her chest. Behind her, the younger one clutched a signal beacon with both hands. They didn't speak. There was no need. The silence between them was filled with meaning. This was their stand. The enemy soldiers came fast. Heavy boots, red armor, glowing rifles. They surrounded the wrecked ship like wolves around a fire. One shouted, "Surrender the assets." Jacob didn't flinch. "She has a name now," he said. "And she's not yours." The soldiers aimed. But before they could shoot, the younger girl threw the beacon into the air. It exploded in a burst of blinding light and screeching sound. The soldiers covered their ears, blinking through the chaos. Jacob moved first, firing sharp and clean. One down, two down. A third dropped screaming. The older girl ran through the smoke, shield raised. She knocked down a soldier 3 times her size. They fought like a single storm. Jacob's fire, her speed, the little one's tricks, all in sync. They were not trained soldiers, but they were fighting for something stronger than orders. They were fighting for each other, but the battle wasn't easy. More soldiers kept coming, wave after wave. Jacob was running out of ammo. The older girl's shield was cracked, her breathing heavy. Then the enemy commander stepped out, tall, masked, and silent. He raised a heavy plasma cannon and aimed at Jacob. Time slowed, the shot fired. Jacob turned to push the girls out of the way. But the blast hit the ground near him and exploded. He flew back, crashing into the wall. The older girl screamed. She ran to him, dropped her shield, and placed her hand on his chest. He was alive, barely his lips moved. "Run," he whispered. But she shook her head. She stood up and looked at the enemy commander, her legs shaking, her arms empty, but her eyes were full of fire. She stepped forward slowly, the snow beneath her feet turning red from burns and blood. She raised both hands and shouted a single word, "Enough." Behind her, the younger girl pressed a button on Jacob's remote, the ship's emergency core. It hummed with power. One more blast. The commander fired again. This time, the blast hit the ground too close. A deep rumble shook the earth. Then everything exploded. Light, fire, smoke, silence. When the dust settled, the enemy ship was burning. The soldiers were gone, scattered like shadows. The commander lay half buried in rubble, unmoving, and in the center of it all, the older girl stood with burns on her arms. The younger one held her from behind. They were hurt, yes, but alive. Jacob opened his eyes slowly, his voice dry. "Did we win?" The older girl nodded. "Together," she said later. A rescue signal reached the human outpost. Medical ships arrived. They took Jacob and the girls to safety. News spread fast. A human had fought to protect 2 alien sisters, a man with number orders, no backup, and no reason, except one. He saw them as his weeks passed. And the girls recovered. They lived now in a quiet human colony, a place of trees, sky, warmth, and names. The younger one was called Lyra. The older one chose the name Nova. Jacob stood with them one morning near the lake. He placed 2 necklaces in their hands, dog tags once used in war. "Now gifts. This," he said, "means you belong." Nova looked up. "We are not assets," she said. Jacob smiled. "You are daughters." And so, on a forgotten moon, a human made a choice. To protect instead of destroy. To welcome instead of fear. To say not go away, but come home. And the galaxy, for once, had no answer to that kind of courage.